So we're going to dive right into this. Well, I find it a very fascinating topic, and it's kind of getting back to, my original training as being an actual pharmacist. Certainly, I've taken some interesting routes and a bit atypical for the regular pharmacist, if you will. So this gets me back to, to some of the other stuff that I know a little bit about, and it's been kind of a fun topic to research and review. On the other flip side of things, I'm a little bit disappointed that there isn't more research and data in the area. A lot of it is some speculation, some theories around it. We're starting to understand it better, but even then, I mean, it kind of goes hand in hand in terms of weight management research, where we just don't know enough about the underlying physiology and mechanisms. So it's very challenging area to kind of to tease out a little bit, but hopefully I can provide you all a little bit of perspective tonight. And so we'll dive into it here. All righty, view, present. Awesome. So welcome to the program, everyone, and thank you all for joining me. I know there's some familiar faces that are going to be here, even though I can't see your faces or anything like that. I'm looking forward to the day when I can do actual real live presentations. That's always been fun. I always enjoy it when people actually laugh at my jokes, so I know whether they're hitting their home or not. But I will continue just to laugh at my own jokes and do my best in that regard. For everyone that's new here, my name is Dan Burton. My patients affectionately call me Dr. Dan, and I'm a pharmacist by training, but a weight management specialist. So I've taken the route of really understanding and helping individuals manage and change the behaviors in their everyday life to not only live a happier and healthier lifestyle, but to also potentially lose weight along the way. And so these webinars are kind of a fun little thing that I try to do just about every single month. I think we've done about 6 or 7 or so over the past year in 2021 here. And I try to kind of pick different topics, different things, and taking some of my learnings and stuff that I'm reviewing and whatnot in order to provide you, the individuals that are showing up here, a little bit more information and insight into various conditions, problems. And in tonight's case, we're going to talk about potential medications that might be causing you to gain weight. As always, I like to put my disclosures in here. I mean, I do it in formal presentations as well, but just so you're all aware, these are the various things that I'm currently doing and involved in. I did not receive a speaker's fee for this event whatsoever. So this is all just being done kind of on my time and because I enjoy providing the information and resources to everyone. A quick note, I'm sure some of you heard and seen there, this session is going to be recorded. It is going to be uploaded onto YouTube and used in promotional purposes and other platforms and such like that. So just so you're aware of that, of course, any information or identifiers will be blocked out before it is uploaded and such like that. So that's just kind of more of a housekeeping item there for you. In terms of questions and stuff like that, write them down. We'll save them to the end. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of questions in terms of various drug names. So I've primarily used the generic drug names in this presentation overall. Obviously, there's the brand name. A lot of the drugs that we're going to be talking about are considerably older, so I just haven't seen them when they've been a brand name, so I don't know a lot of the brand name drugs for some of these. So if you're unsure, just Googling, the name of said drug, if it's a drug that you're on or something like that, just Google it. It should pop up. If there's one specifically that, you have a question about or something like that, I will do my best to answer it. A lot of these drugs are kind of in my wheelhouse that I do deal with on a day-to-day basis. But as with anything and, drug names and stuff, and even though I've done this for 10 years, I still got a lot to learn in terms of names and stuff and the wacky things that some companies will come up with. So today's learning objectives, I really kind of want to touch on what we're looking at in terms of a risk and benefit. So whenever we prescribe a medication, whenever we look at a treatment or an intervention, we're always weighing risks and benefits. And the benefits generally have to outweigh the risks in order for us to move forward with the treatment. If it doesn't, well, then we're doing essentially harm to a patient. We want to do the least amount of harm possible, obviously, but that can be somewhat challenging at times, particularly when it comes to managing some of these conditions and the weight promoting effects of these medications. We'll review the main classes of medications that can lead to weight gain, and then hopefully I'm going to kind of take you through and just understand how we can manage our weight despite taking weight promoting medications. All right, medications, what are they? I mean, they're substances that have been designed to treat, cure, prevent, and help manage or improve medical conditions. Nearly 50% of North Americans will have taken a medication in order to treat a medical condition in the last 30 days. I would almost argue it's actually probably higher than that. But, that's kind of a rough estimate. Unfortunately, medications, they do have side effects and they affect everybody a little bit differently. As technologies get better and stuff, these meds are getting more specific in what they do, how they react, how they respond, and the side effects that they potentially have. So we are getting better, and the new age of medicines that are coming out are quite remarkable, but definitely anything that we're putting in our body, even if you drink too much water, there's a chance it could cause harm. So we always have kind of these weight gain medications, but we always have to keep in mind the condition that's being treated. And most often, a lot of these drugs are dealing with mental illnesses. So if you already have a condition that puts you at a high risk of gaining weight or have gained weight because of the condition, and then we add on a medication, well, that's suddenly going to make the whole process worse. And obviously, there's the issue of medication-induced weight gain might cause further psychological distress and ultimately worsen the overall condition and make things more challenging in terms of a treatment perspective. This has been especially true for women who maybe are dealing with things like depression, anxiety, sleep disorders, and that sort of thing. Women have a lot more biases and stuff like that around them that, females need to look a certain way, need to do certain things and all that sort of stuff. And, if they have a condition like depression, anxiety, that causes all kinds of issues that you shouldn't have, mental illness, blah, blah, blah. And then if we add a medication on top of that, that causes you to gain weight, it's just this spiraling effect that, is going to be a big, big problem and ultimately might lead to so much distress that a lot of people will discontinue or stop taking a medication. So I just wanted to provide this slide right here as kind of a bit of a perspectives on medication-induced weight gain, because I think these really speak to some of the issues and some of the concerns that people have with these medications, and also to show that if you have gained weight while being on medication, you're certainly not alone. Like, these are thoughts and feelings that everybody has. In particular, this group right here was a study that looked at female veterans. They all had serious mental illnesses and they were prescribed some kind of psychotropic medication. So something to manage, say, PTSD, depression, anxiety, and that sort of thing. And they ultimately gained weight. And some of the perspectives here, considerable distress due to weight gain, feelings of futility regarding losing or controlling weight. It just seems to be out of control. You're doing exactly everything the same. The weight is packing on and there's nothing you can do about it. You become, they were talking about being self-conscious or unattractive, ashamed, guilty, and self-blaming. We top that with a mental illness aspect of things and thinking that you can't control that aspect. And then all of a sudden you're gaining weight. I mean, again, it's just that spiraling rock rolling down the hill kind of effect, right? And then the feeling that the lifestyle changes needed to lose a considerable amount of weight are overwhelming and practically or motivationally out of reach. So when it comes to even just trying to make changes, it seems like no matter what you do, the weight sticks around no matter what. And obviously that's going to cause a lot of stress, a lot of anxiety, because you feel powerless in this situation. So a quick review over what is obesity and the definition of obesity. This is the one that I use in particular. And what is described as is an excess amount of adipose tissue that may pose a health risk. So based on this definition, not everybody needs to lose weight. There's plenty of people and plenty of patients that I work with that are perfectly healthy at the current weight that they're at. In fact, if you're engaging in a number of health behaviors such as physical activity, eating a healthy diet, and that sort of thing, you can often negate many of the risks that are associated with having extra fat tissue. But generally, the more weight that an individual has, the greater that their risk of death and poor health outcomes are. So as we get especially into the higher, into the extremes in terms of weight, that certainly can lead to issues and problems. So really, I just wanted to show kind of give some perspective and kind of this chicken and egg issue that we're having with the medications here is that Obesity and weight gain is becoming it is a global epidemic. It is becoming more and more of a problem. The rates are increasing, particularly with severe obesity. We're seeing a huge jump in that regard, and general obesity and overweight as well. And concurrently, we're seeing other medical conditions on the rise, such as high blood pressure, diabetes, and that sort of thing. And they kind of all will go hand in hand in an overall condition that we would call metabolic syndrome. So we have a bit of a problem. We have the rates of obesity that are going up, and it's multifactorial as to why that is the case. There's a million and one things that are going on, but our medications that we're using to treat some conditions, they may be contributing to this weight gain. So in one sense, they're beneficial. They treat the condition of concern, depression, anxiety, diabetes, that sort of thing. But weight gain will occur with these medications, and it may lead to people stopping their medication. So while you may have treated the condition for a while, it caused weight gain. Individual didn't like that weight gain, so they came off the medication, and we lose control of the original condition, and ultimately the weight's likely going to stick around and cause more problems. So what do we focus more on? Do we look at the weight issue? Do we look at the management of other chronic diseases? How do we approach it? So it's all this balancing act. And really, again, it's that risk and benefit. What do we do? What do we take away? How do we manage this? And that sort of thing. And sometimes the best medication or the best treatment might have more side effects. And that's really the unfortunate part, because it's how do we figure this out? What's going to be the best option to ultimately provide support in both realms of things? So we really need to take these things into account versus the condition, the medication we're using, and that sort of thing. So here's a few conditions that are linked to obesity or at least to weight gain. Many of the mental illnesses, largely the reason why these conditions will lead to weight gain is just because, when you have a mental condition, whether it's depression, anxiety, schizophrenia, what have you, that's going to consume a lot of your cognitive capacity or your ability to make choices on a day-to-day basis. So even the simple things of, just remembering to take your lunch to work, for example, that's going to be space that's going to be taken up, and you're going to forget your lunch, or even, did you even pack a lunch? These conditions take up that cognitive space, and it makes it very, very challenging for you to make the choices that you want to make on a day-to-day basis. When it comes to things like diabetes and polycystic ovarian syndrome, we've got things like insulin resistance, so elevated insulin levels. PCOS, we have issues with testosterone levels and other androgens and stuff like that. Hypothyroidism, our thyroid hormone and function in our body essentially is regulating our metabolism. So hypo means low, and thyroidism means the condition of thyroid. And if you have low thyroid levels, your metabolism is ultimately going to be at a lower level. And then we have the other things like menopause, so any kind of hormonal changes in estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone, those are going to cause some issues and problems as well. Cushing's disease is kind of this an overproduction of cortisol hormones or stress hormones. And then finally, sleep apnea. Sleep apnea is a huge one. If you snore, if you're tired through the day, if you wake up with headaches, anything like that, there is a chance that you have sleep apnea. And I do recommend being tested for it if you haven't. A CPAP machine, though, while it's not the most attractive thing in the world, it can be life-changing in just helping you to get a restful night's sleep and to take the stress off of your body and to ultimately make managing your weight that much easier. So patients with severe mental illnesses tend to already be at the higher risk of metabolic disease, diabetes, obesity, blood pressure, that sort of thing. And again, we have this issue of managing the mental illness or have an increased risk of weight gain. So it's a real shit sandwich, and we got to wonder what we're going to do in this case. Before we dive into that, though, I want to review the medications that might lead to weight gain, review some of the mechanisms slightly, kind of go over that aspect of it, because ultimately, with knowledge becomes a greater understanding. So if you can kind of understand what's going on, what's happening, we can ultimately create that self-awareness and maybe create some change around it for you. Now, a huge disclaimer that I do want to talk about here is that do not stop any of your medications. This by no means is medical advice or anything like that. If you do get something from this presentation, absolutely talk with your family physician, your healthcare providers, and that sort of thing. But this is purely for informational purposes only and not to be taken as medical advice. need to talk to your healthcare provider before you make any changes or switches, and work in that collaborative sense to try and find the right treatment that works for you. So these are kind of the main classes here: antipsychotics and mood stabilizers, antidepressants, diabetes medications, high blood pressure medications, and corticosteroids. There are many other drugs that have been listed as like weight gain as a side effect. However, they haven't really, they don't cause a significant amount for a vast majority of people. Maybe we haven't studied it enough and that sort of thing. But these are kind of the main classes that we tend to think about in the medical field. Again, we have limited knowledge as to how these medications work. They're, again, used for managing mental health. And generally, it's the older medications that come with a greater risk of weight gain. The reason being is that the old drugs, I mean, it's kind of old technology and old science. So when they first created these drugs, they weren't very specific. They didn't bind to a specific receptor. A lot of them would kind of go into the body and bind to multiple receptors. It's almost like hitting a little finishing nail with a sledgehammer. So it's like way overkill, hits multiple receptors while at the same time hitting the receptor that we're trying to in order to treat the condition. Unfortunately, when you have drugs like this, what ends up happening is, yeah, you hit multiple receptors. So then weight gain and other issues can ultimately come up and you're going to get more side effects. Same thing is going to be with drugs that have a lot of side effects. They tend to hit multiple receptors. And until we narrow them down and we get into second generation, third generation, and that sort of thing, we get more and more specific and they have less and less effects. The classic ones that I like to talk about are the antihistamines, so things like Benadryl, Reactin, Arius, and that sort of thing. Benadryl is a first generation antihistamine, very, very effective at what it does. It's very, very potent, but it crosses the blood-brain barrier and causes a lot of sedation, tiredness, dry mouth, dry eyes, and that sort of thing. Whereas when we get into Reactin, which is second generation, and Arius, which is third generation, these ones get more and more and more specific for just one specific receptor, the histamine receptor, and they have less and less side effects and less of that sedation and other problems kind of going on there. So that's where the science currently goes. And yeah, a lot of these older drugs are kind of the issues in that respect of things. And sometimes, as I said, with the Benadryl, the most effective drugs for treatment also come with the greatest risk of weight gain. All righty. So we have the antipsychotics and mood stabilizers, anti-epileptics, and that sort of thing. The main conditions that we're kind of looking at with these guys are things like schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, severe depression, epilepsy. There's other conditions that they might be used for, but these are kind of just the more general ones. Now, generally, a vast majority, 70% or more people may experience some weight gain, and that could be anywhere from actually losing weight, so losing 1.5 kilos, to gaining upwards of 16.2 kilos. It all really depends on the particular medication, but these drugs tend to be the worst offenders. These are the ones that we're always worried about, always need to have the proper monitoring in place, and certainly can be problematic. The way that the antipsychotics work, they actually at a lower dose have a bit of an antihistamine effect, kind of like Benadryl and the other antihistamines. And what this ultimately can lead to is it leads to a decrease in satiety. So when you eat a meal, you don't feel as full as you should be. And so you're kind of wanting to eat more. You get an increase in appetite. So when it does come time for food and stuff, you just feel like eating more, you feel more hungry. And unfortunately, you get an increase in carbohydrate cravings. So obviously, you're going to want the apple pie over the apple a lot more. The big ones that we're really concerned about are clozapine, olanzapine, haloperidol, and chlorpromazine. These are kind of some very, very heavy hitters. A vast majority of the population isn't on these medications, or if you are, you're generally on them for a very short period of time, or you have a very, very severe mental illness that's being managed if you're on something like clozapine. Again, clozapine is actually one of my favorite antipsychotic medication. It is very, very effective at managing not only things like schizophrenia, bipolar, and other conditions, but it's super, super effective, but it does come with a lot of side effects. Olanzapine and haloperidol, we generally will give those in a hospital environment where an individual is agitated or having other issues and stuff like that, and we need to help in supporting them to calm down. So that's generally when we'll see that. Most people are on a regular schedule of those drugs unless they absolutely need to be. As you can see from this little graph here, the minuses means you might actually lose weight while on it. So aripiprazole or Abilify is a newer antipsychotic, and generally people, they're more weight neutral, can still gain weight on it. Lamotrigine, that is a anti-epileptic, possibly an adjuvant to bipolar therapy and stuff like that. See people there actually can lose some weight on lamotrigine. We have the big hitters here, and then you have some other ones like valproic acid causes weight gain. It's a mood stabilizer, and I'll touch on it here in a second. Lithium, valproic acid, these guys are a little bit different in the ways that they affect. Lithium in particular, it was kind of interesting reading the research in this regard, but what seems to happen, or what they noted, at least in a paper from like the 90s, was that lithium causes an increase in thirst, and ultimately people were drawn to higher calorie beverages. So they consumed those, and ultimately they gained weight. As well, there might be some evidence that lithium might actually affect the thyroid function. So your metabolizing function, essentially, and if it affects that thyroid gland, shuts down thyroid production, and suddenly you might start gaining weight in that regard. Valproic acid, on the other hand, increased appetite, stimulates insulin. More insulin around can ultimately lead to weight gain and retention of more nutrients and stuff like that. Carbamazepine, lamotrigine tend to be more weight neutral, and topiramate is actually used as a weight loss medication in the States. It's combined with phentermine, and I think it's quizamia, something like that. And that's a combination drug that's actually used for weight management. I don't have a hell of a lot of experience with it really at all. I'm not a big fan of topiramate because it comes with other side effects such as cognitive effects and stuff like that. But it looks like it's an okay weight loss aid, and it seems to be better tolerated when it's added to another agent like the phentermine. So that's the antipsychotics and mood stabilizer there. Now we have the antidepressants. Antidepressants generally are better tolerated and don't cause as much weight gain compared to antipsychotics and stuff like that. But there's a hell of a lot more people in the world that have a need for an antidepressant. Depression, anxiety, personality disorders, eating disorders, and stuff like that are much, 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 much more common than things like schizophrenia and bipolar disorder. So a lot more people are going to be on these drugs. And so overall, that's going to increase the global burden if we just have that many more people that are on these drugs and potentially gaining weight because of them. But as you can see, antipsychotics went up to about 16.2 kilos. The antidepressants, anywhere from minus 0.9, again, you might lose weight on them, to a gain of 7.3 kilograms. All right, did I skip? Okay. So the mechanism of action. When we look at the antidepressants, the main things that they're doing is they're increasing 3 neurotransmitters in the brain. We've got serotonin, norepinephrine, and dopamine. So serotonin is kind of our general mood regulator, makes us feel good, kind of gives us a range of emotions, but generally keeps things on an even keel for us. Norepinephrine tends to be it's like noradrenaline. So it's a sister molecule to adrenaline. So when you're fight or flight, when you're walking down the path and you see a bear or something like that, that increase in heart rate, that's adrenaline increasing, and norepinephrine is also increasing in your body as well. Dopamine, this is the reward hormone. This is our feel-good hormone. It gets released when we have good food, when we have sex, when we gamble. It has all those different properties and aspects of things. So the antidepressants tend to affect those 3 neurotransmitters. Now, interestingly, with serotonin, initially, we see a reduction in impulsivity. You actually get a reduction in your food intake. And what ends up happening is you just end up eating less. And out the gate, a lot of people, when they first go on these medications, might actually lose weight. So it slows down it reduces your appetite via metabolism in the fight or flight system. And so you might get that possible weight loss. However, what seems to happen in the long term is you get an increase in carbohydrate cravings, and then possibly that could lead to weight gain if you're over consuming on carbohydrates. So we don't exactly know when the switch happens or what the case might be, but a lot of serotonin-based drugs or selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors are actually used in managing things like binge eating disorder. And initially, it can reduce that impulsivity. It can help somebody to be more in control of their binges, and ultimately potentially lead to weight loss and controlling that aspect, at least in the short term. In the long term, there seems to get some changes and there is possible weight gain. And it all depends on the medication itself. Norepinephrine, usually if we increase this one, we're going to see minimal weight gain, right? It's kind of similar to noradrenaline or to adrenaline. So if we're getting an increase in heart rate and blood pressure, likely we're not going to see any weight gain. It's generally going to be weight neutral or potentially lead to weight loss. Dopamine, on the other hand, has a very, very crucial reward in reward and eating behavior. It acts on our energy balance system in the hypothalamus. So our hypothalamus is kind of an organ in the brain that regulates our food intake and stuff like that. And what we find is that when we upregulate dopamine in this area, we get a decrease in appetite and food-seeking behaviors. So dopamine is the main system that tells us, hey, you need to go out and find some food. And what we can do is that when we increase that dopamine there, we get a decrease in those food-seeking behaviors and potentially lead to weight loss. Whereas, I spelt a word wrong, deduced, whereas reduced dopamine neurotransmission can lead to weight gain. So obviously we have a downregulation of that can lead to it. And as I have it down at the bottom there, a fun fact is that individuals with obesity, a large majority of them have been shown to have altered or low levels of dopamine activity in their brain. And therefore that might lead them to be more eating more food, needing to binge in order to get that dopamine level up or what have you. And that's why a medication like Contrave, which contains bupropion increases dopamine and norepinephrine levels, can be useful in weight loss. There's some good evidence around it, and it can be an effective antidepressant, but also helping with weight management and weight loss. And for those of you that don't know Contrave is a combination of both bupropion and naltrexone combined together. Very effective. I have some good experience with that. It's relatively new-ish to Canada, but both of those drugs have been around for some time. In terms of peripheral effects, this is an interesting piece, and we really don't know enough what's going on here. But what seems to happen with some of the antidepressant medications is that it may actually lead to a decrease in blood sugar levels, so may cause hypoglycemia. So if your blood sugars go down, what that's going to stimulate is your body's going to say, hey, we don't have enough nutrients in the system, so you need to go out and eat some more. And so it's going to push you to go out and find some food, and therefore likely increasing your calorie intake. It's more specific medications like the monoamine oxidase inhibitors. These are relatively rarely used, but certainly some people are on them. And it can lead to, you getting that increased stimulating hunger effect and ultimately eating more food. There is also some evidence that maybe we see an alteration in your fat cells. So this is a really, really interesting area. But if you have this alteration in your fat cells, they might not be able to get broken down properly. So if you've been on this drug, it alters your fat cells, your body, you get into a calorie deficit and try to lose weight. And suddenly your body is either A, not able to break down the fat cells as easily, or it's harder to do, or it basically gains more fat and triglycerides more easily, ultimately leading to potential weight gain independent of calorie intake. So you could be eating exactly the same, get put on this medication, it alters your fat cells, and then suddenly you're gaining weight with the exact same amount of calorie intake just because your fat cells are more primed or changed or altered in a way. Again, phenelzine is very, very rarely used. Excuse me. It's one of the definitely older medications. Very effective at what it does, but that does have a potential issue that can kind of come there. We generally use these third or fourth line in very severe depression, anxiety, and that sort of thing. So that would be kind of those ones that we watch out for. The worst offenders here, just to give you kind of a brief overview, we have the tricyclic antidepressants, so amitriptyline, nortriptyline. You'll probably see these two if you've ever had chronic pain or sleep issues. Amitriptyline, again, they're really super effective drugs. And that's the really shitty thing is that we want to use them, but there is that potential for weight gain. Phenelzine is kind of the worst one here. In terms of selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, citalopram and paroxetine, if you've ever been on either of these drugs, you definitely know what I'm talking about in that regard. Citalopram in particular is quite a common medication, and a lot of people have been on it. The sister drug, escitalopram, or it's Celexa, doesn't have nearly as much of the weight gaining effect. Paroxetine is just an antidepressant. Unless you are needing to gain weight, I generally do not put any patients on paroxetine whatsoever at the start. And then mirtazapine, again, a very, very effective drug, but it can lead to weight gain. So these drugs are all very, very effective. We tend to use them in severe depression. Maybe, in my opinion, we should probably be using them earlier, but we're often scared of this side effect and the weight gain risk because, again, if I put you on this and you gain a bunch of weight, you're probably not going to stay compliant to treatment. So very tough to say, but in reality with these drugs, not everyone gains weight on them. And if it is the most effective treatment for you, that's really what we got to look at as the most important piece. Alrighty, the diabetes medications. probably many of you are going to be more familiar with these ones and the common conditions, obviously type 1 and type 2. Type 1 diabetes is more of an autoimmune condition. You tend to develop it a little bit earlier in life. That's where we have the kids that are going to hospital and need to get put on insulin. Type 2 diabetes tends to develop later on in life. When it comes to these drugs, it's interesting because a lot of the diabetes medications are actually quite effective for weight loss and have been made into weight loss medications. But generally, we're seeing a 1.2 to 6 kilo gain depending on the medication. The thiazolidines, these ones are kind of falling out of favor as well because they have other side effects and potential issues. But what they ultimately did is they made your body more sensitive to insulin. So the insulin your body produced is fantastic. It's good. It brings your blood sugar levels down. And so it kind of sensitized your organs. And that made it easier for insulin to move sugar from your bloodstream inside of your cells so that you can do the cell things that you need to do. All really, really great things. However, these drugs seem to actually, well, they cause fluid retention, which is kind of a bad thing, but they also seem to activate receptors in the brain and increase your appetite. So we don't have all the answers around those two, but again, they're kind of falling out of favor, but you may be on them for additional therapy if needed. The insulin secretagogues, these are a little bit more common. Again, I'm not a big fan of these medications because they don't really add a whole pile of benefit other than kind of reducing your blood sugars, but not really. Essentially, the way that these guys work is they go to your pancreas and they tell your pancreas to squeeze as hard as it possibly can to push out as much insulin as it can. And it brings your blood sugar levels down, which is fantastic. But again, more insulin floating around, especially if you have more nutrients in the system, that can lead to an increased level of sugars and fats being stored and stuff. Insulin on the flip side, we have the short and long acting formulations, Lantus, Tresiba. Short acting are Novorapid and Humalog. Insulin is a fantastic drug. It does a lot of really great things. It can certainly help to manage your blood sugars, but we can get weight gain that comes with it. Now, one thing I always want to point out, particularly when it comes to insulin therapy, a lot of people immediately worry about the weight gain aspect. But the weight gain aspect with these medications and an increase in insulin is really only going to occur if there is an excess amount of nutrients around. So either A, you went to your doctor, your blood sugars are uncontrolled and they're very high. And the doctor says, well, we need more therapy. So I'm going to put you on insulin. If there's the excess sugar and nutrients around, you start that insulin, that sugar is going to get taken up into your cells, particularly your fat cells, because there's excess amounts of it around. It's going to get stored as fat, and that's going to cause weight gain. However, and the same thing if you're in a calorie surplus. If you're taking in more calories than what your body needs to burn, you add in insulin or increase the insulin levels, those are going to get taken up, and any excess is going to get put into fat cells rather than just being dumped out of the body. So if you're in a calorie surplus or uncontrolled blood sugars, that's really where we're worried about the weight gain. But if you get onto these medications and your blood sugars are managed and they're doing well, the chance of weight gain is actually very, very small, if at all. High blood pressure medications, again, these ones are kind of interesting. They might be used in things like heart failure, migraines, tremors, AFib, that sort of thing. Most of the blood pressure medications tend to be neutral. You can see all the negatives over here on this side in this table. Beta blockers are the main concern, at least initially, and then we seem to get a weight stabilization, only 3.4 kilos on average. Obviously, some people can gain more, some people gain less, but that's kind of the average amount we got going on there. The way that beta blockers work is they actually slow down your heart rate. So you have a number of beta receptors on your cardiovascular system. When we hit those beta receptors with a beta blocker, it slows down your heart rate and calms your fight or flight system. So again, that system, if you're walking down the path and you see the bear, adrenaline ramps it up, beta blockers calms it down. And so when we're calming it down, we get a slow in your heart rate, your blood pressure, we get a slow down in your metabolism, you're going to fidget and move less, and you're going to have some issues, possibly some issues with exercise. The weight gain is usually minimal to moderate, and then it will plateau. Corticosteroids finally here. These guys are kind of a pain in the butt because there's not really other options if you are having an issue in this regard. So if you have any severe inflammation, an autoimmune condition, with people that are in severe COVID issues, they will give them a corticosteroid called dexamethasone to reduce inflammation, to calm down the inflammatory storm that COVID can ultimately drive in people. In the short term, these drugs, no issues, no problems. They do the job that they're supposed to do. But in the long term, they certainly can lead to issues and can cause a significant amount of weight gain. I often manage people who have diabetes in these drugs because it can cause a huge spike in your blood sugars. Cortisol is basically what they're mimicking, so our stress hormone. And cortisol actually in the short term will actually play a role in weight loss. So it'll actually help you to break down your fat cells and release the fat to be burned. In the long term, though, cortisol is going to cause things like fluid retention, increase in your appetite. It alters your metabolism, insulin resistance, and basically how our body stores fat. So it'll actually move the fat around on our body, causing other issues and concerns, and can definitely cause weight gain. So these are kind of just two examples of what corticosteroids can do and what I talk about when it can alter where fat is stored in the body. We have moon face. What can happen here is that the fat will actually get redistributed to around the face and create kind of a moon type shape. And we also have what's called a buffalo hump. So we'll get this depositing of fat on the back of the neck. It can move from other parts of the body. It can be new fat that developed there, but we can get a buffalo hump that can develop in that respect. These are obviously very severe forms of it, but certainly something that we will watch for and monitor if you're on these medications long term. Other medications I just want to mention here, as I said before, there's lots that just haven't been potentially brought out or really brought to the forefront. It's either the weight gain really isn't that much severe or common, and it just isn't, and maybe the weight gain isn't due to actual fat. It's more of like an issue with fluid buildup and that sort of thing. And really, it can also be very difficult to distinguish, well, what is actual weight gain because of the medication and what is potential weight gain due to the condition itself. Examples, though, would be things like opioids or any drugs that are potentially used for substance use disorder treatment. So if you've had addiction issues with opioids and stuff like that, drugs like methadone and that sort of thing can be a little bit problematic and potentially lead to weight gain. But in this situation, again, as well, is it a change in your life circumstances and situations where suddenly you're eating more, maybe becoming less active because you're noticing changes in your mood and that sort of thing? Or is it because of the drug itself? Can be a little bit challenging to distinguish. Chemotherapy, I know most people think of someone who goes on chemotherapy of them losing weight, getting quite skinny, vomiting, and that sort of thing. Certainly can be the case for a lot of them, but also some of them can ultimately lead to weight gain, or at least when you come off the chemotherapy, leading to a rebound in weight gain. So what do we do about weight gain due to medications? The good news is that there is things we can do. We can lose weight, and we can certainly work to prevent weight gain as well if you are put on one of these medications. First things first, you of course want to work with your healthcare provider. You want to look at optimizing your treatment, look at the additional medications that are out there. We're going to go back to the boring basics that I talk about every single one of these presentations. And then as well, we need to be patient. So when talking with your healthcare provider, super important, weigh the pros and the cons, get a full understanding of the conditions that we're treating here. We really want to know what are the best agents that are going to help to treat your condition, but also prevent weight gain. And we really need to get a full spectrum as to which ones are the best, what's going to be the good one to put in place. If you go on a medication and you end up gaining weight, please, please, please do not just stop your medication on your own. Go in, talk with your clinician, your physician, especially some of these drugs, we have to do a slow taper off to get you off of it properly. But talk to your clinician, have a conversation, say, this is what the issue that's going on. Is there other options and things in place that we can do? And can we create a different game plan? So we want to have that balance of treating the underlying condition and preventing the weight gain. It all kind of depends on the risk that's there. And for some people, some medical conditions, the weight gain is totally worth it. Other people, it's absolutely devastating. So I'm always a big advocate of looking at quality years versus quantity years. So if it means that, say, I've in the past worked with a number of patients that have schizophrenia, and if I can get their condition under control with the medication, that is absolutely life-changing for them. They can get that under control, they can manage it, they can go to work, they can do all those great and fantastic things. But at the same time, they gain 30, 40, 50 pounds. A lot of them are kind of like, yeah, totally, totally worth it. I am 100% able to do what I need to do. I gained weight. Yeah, it sucks. It really sucks, but it's the benefit of the medication and helping with everything else is so, so much important. As well, if they were uncontrolled, they might still gain that weight. They might not. but we want to balance that risk and really find the quality years that you're getting the most out of your years versus just trying to extend your life and not put you on the best treatment. Okay. So the other option that we might look at is potentially adding medications. Obviously, adding a medication to treat the side effect of another medication is never ideal. But what we want to try and do is add something on if we need to that's not going to cause very much harm or very, very minimal harm. So we'd look at adding these drugs that might actually help to treat it. Metformin, it's often added to antipsychotic and corticosteroid medications. Very, very effective at helping to manage and counteract some of the side effects that can come with these drugs. So we definitely like to try and add it on. And there's some evidence that it might either prevent weight gain or may actually help with weight loss. The GLP-1 receptor agonists, again, these are diabetes medications. They help to control blood sugars and stuff like that. This is your Saxendas, Trulicities, Ozempics, and Wegovys. Very, very effective at what they do in terms of weight loss and weight management, obviously. And they might actually be able to be useful in replacing things like insulin secretagogues, and that sort of thing. There is lots of very interesting drugs that are in the pipeline. Be sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel. I'll be talking about some of those guys here in a few weeks, but there are some drugs that it's pretty mind-blowing how effective they are at managing weight, and may potentially be some treatments that we add on in this regard. So yeah, stay tuned in that aspect. Now, the boring basics, my favorite parts, not always the part that my patients and clients like to talk about, but these are ultimately the things that, regardless of if you're going on a medication or not, if you're struggling with your weight or not, these are all the things that we always need to be mindful of. These are part of living a healthier lifestyle and finding what ultimately works for you. So consistency. I cannot stress enough about the consistency. If there's anything that you take away from ways to manage things, you got to be consistent. You've got to try it for at least a period of time to see if it works, find what doesn't work, change some things, and then try again. Don't completely overhaul your diet and your life. I know New Year's resolutions and stuff like that are coming up here. A lot of people are going to do a big overhaul, but ultimately they change too many things, try to do too much at once, and don't take into account all the other factors of, well, life. And that ultimately causes issues. They can't do it consistently, and they fall back to their old habits and ways. Starting small is a really big part. So you want to make your goal easy, but not too easy, because if it doesn't challenge you, you're gonna get bored with it very quickly, right? If you say, well, I'll do it once a week or something like that, you'll continue to put it off because it seems too easy. Like, oh, I can do that quickly. I don't need to worry about it. Put it off, and you'll procrastinate on it. You want to track your progress. So whatever that's going to look like for you, but tracking can give us a really good perspective on how we actually did. Humans, we are terrible historians. We're terrible at looking in the past and trying to recall what we ate, what we did, and that sort of thing. As well, we tend to focus on what's most front of mind. So if you had a really crappy couple of days, the last, couple of days, ultimately you're going to be focused on that versus like, hey, you were fantastic the rest of the month. So why are we focusing on these 2 days? But you wouldn't have that perspective unless you were tracking or keeping some idea as to what is going on. So we want to focus on as well behaviors versus outcomes. So eating more protein at breakfast 5 times this week. When we focus on things like outcomes of a weight or what have you, that's a finish line. That's a goal. That's great. That can be a target that we can aim at, but it's going to be largely out of your control. Whereas eating the protein at breakfast, you either do it or you don't. And so you have that control over it. And fundamentally, the biggest thing here that I always like to drive home is we're aiming for mastery, not perfection. Perfection is never going to happen, but mastery is the continuous process of failing and learning and trying again, and ultimately, solving life's problems. And the thing with a fulfilling life is that you solve one problem and you ultimately create better problems for yourself. And I like the kind of using the example of, Warren Buffett and a homeless person both have money problems. Warren Buffett just has better money problems. So thinking about it in that sense that we're just creating problems we're looking to fulfill, these problems are never going to go away. And if you don't have problems to solve, it actually shows that it actually leads to a poor quality of life. There's actually a very interesting study that came out recently with a number of people who were kind of getting paid to like stay at home or to work a whole lot less. And there was a whole decrease in drive in terms of purpose and mental health conditions going up and stuff like that. Yeah, I thought it was super interesting. Only got a snippet of it, haven't read the full study, but yeah, we need some kind of purpose in our lives, and solving problems is part of that. I'm going to switch. Oh, yeah, I did. Calories in have to be less than calories out. So this has to be a fundamental piece if we're looking at managing our weight. You can't get around it. It's the law of thermodynamics. Yes, medications can certainly affect this and make the calories in and the calories out more challenging to mitigate and manage. That's why we need to just be mindful of it and thinking about how we're going about it. A quick way to kind of just a quick math, we could get so far gone in all the math and everything like that. But I like to use this as kind of just a rough outline for people as to how many calories should I eat. We're always looking at the idea of goal body weight. Some people might refer to this as lean body mass, but you want to take your goal body weight is a weight that you think you can maintain sustainably or a weight that you might be at your leanest, and you times it by 12. That's it. It's a simple starting point. It gives you an idea of kind of some calories to roughly work towards and be eating consistently. It can help with the preventing metabolic adaptation. And if you're within that one plus or minus 100 calories consistently, it works. You definitely can give yourself a starting point. If you do it for a while and you don't lose any weight, say you do it consistently for a month, reduce the calorie amount a little bit, go down to 250 calories or something, see how things go there, do it consistently again, and continue reducing. Don't just do it for a week and see no change or see a weight gain, which a lot of people do when they start eating more calories, and they freak out and send me angry emails and that kind of thing. But ultimately what's happening there is you're likely filling your body up with more glycogen and energy levels that it's kind of saying, hey, this is awesome. Or we're trying to correct the metabolic adaptation that has been going on for so long and bringing your metabolism up to where it potentially should be. So yeah, if you want more details on that, I do have other presentations, YouTube videos and stuff like that, but that's kind of just a rough overline. So your goal body weight times by 12 to get to how many calories you should be consuming for weight loss. Protein is king. I say this always, I talk about it all the time, protein, protein, protein. Stop worrying about the carbs, the fat. Yes, they are important, but many people do not get enough protein. I had a patient today. She was eating like 44 grams of protein a day, and she's like 150 pounds or something. I'm like, you're not eating nearly enough protein. You need to get more protein in. There's no harm that comes with it. It doesn't have to be animal sources. In fact, if you have plant sources, it's ultimately going to be better for you probably in the long term, but you need to get that protein in because it's going to help to keep you fuller for longer. And your body needs it to build muscle mass, which is ultimately your metabolic rate and stuff. How much protein? Goal body weight times by 1. That's it. It's that easy. I promise you. 200 pounds, if that's your goal body weight, times it by 1, 200 grams of protein a day. Eating consistently. So this is going to vary person to person. I'm not saying you need to eat 8 times a day. I'm not even saying you need to eat 6 times a day. But having more than 1 meal a day, probably going to be more beneficial than intermittent fasting. In fact, intermittent fasting, 99% of people cannot maintain an intermittent fasting schedule consistently. It's just not realistic. Most of the data around it is bro science and stuff like that. It just really is just not worth it. And it's not a life that's worth living, to be quite honest. And it does nothing extra for weight loss. In fact, it might actually cause a greater loss of muscle mass. Greater loss of muscle mass reduces your metabolic rate even further when we want to preserve that. And that's because your body needs protein. And so if you're not getting a continuous supply of protein throughout the day, there's a chance that you could lose that muscle mass. All right. Aim for at least 2 times a day. If you find you're overeating at a certain meal or snack or what have you, take the meal beforehand or the snack beforehand, that meal, and have a snack there. Add in a meal, add in a little extra food, and that can help to curb your overeating at a said meal. Most people tend to overeat in the evening. So looking at earlier in the day of providing more nutrients to yourself earlier in the day, and that can help to curb some of those evening cravings and snacking and stuff like that. Eating enough. So this is kind of what I've been talking about with metabolic adaptation. What a lot of people do is they weigh a certain amount, they go on a diet, drop their calorie intake, they lose a bunch of weight. Awesome. Calorie intake comes back. Oh, hey, their metabolic rate started to come up. Oh, and shit, because they were a little bit metabolically adapted and they went back to their old eating patterns, what ended up happening is they overshot. So they go a period of time, they go back onto a calorie deficit, drop their calories down even further, again, it looks like, hey, we lost some weight, but your metabolic rate also came down. And you know what? You went on an unsustainable diet, weight suddenly comes back on because you return back to your old patterns and behaviors. Here's your calorie amounts. You gain way more weight. You overshoot where you were originally now. And your metabolic rate is still way down here because ultimately you're yo-yoing between the amount of calories your body actually needs to way too little calories. So your body's just saying, screw it. We're just going to keep your metabolic rate as low as possible because we have such an inconsistency in what you're actually eating. So it's definitely a problem in terms of if you've been chronically dieting for a long time, and we actually might need to just bring you up to your maintenance level of calories based on your height, age, and weight and stuff like that. Eat there for a couple of weeks to help correct that. And then we might be able to create a calorie deficit that's not as severe in order to lose further weight. So a lot of things behind that. That's what I spend a lot of time in my day just supporting people to work on. But it is, it is possible, and trying to eat closer to that amount of food, that goal body weight times 12, can certainly help to correct some of this. Other factors of equal importance: sleep, main priority. Like, please get more sleep. I've been getting more sleep. I know this was something that I was terrible at, but since I've been getting more sleep, my life has been substantially better. And the days that I don't get the proper amount of sleep, I am a cranky mother effer. So definitely make sleep a priority for yourself. It can be very beneficial. Therapy. We all got crap. If you can afford it, if you have the privilege to hook up with a therapist, something like that, talk to a therapist. Even if you feel like you don't need to, talking to somebody, getting a third party perspective is so beneficial. Mindfulness and self-awareness. This is huge. You want to understand the emotions, feelings, and thoughts that you are having on a day-to-day basis, why you engage in the behaviors that you do. When you gain that understanding, you can ultimately make changes. Stress and anxiety management, self-care, even though I hate that term, you get kind of the idea that's going on there, and compassion and empathy for you. The biggest thing to always remember is that we all have stuff that has affected us now in our lives. We've been in relationships, we have upbringings, what have you. We've learned things that aren't always the best for us. So we're all doing the best that we can with what we have and where we're at in life. And always remembering that not only for the people around you, but for yourself as well. All right, some final conclusions here. Some medications can lead to weight gain. We got to balance that risk and benefit. Weight loss and weight gain prevention is definitely possible. There's some good evidence around it. If you're on these medications, weight loss can still occur. It is going to be more challenging, but it is something that is doable. Sometimes we might need more medication, but focusing on the boring basics is going to be something that we do regardless of what is going on there. And of course, my favorite tagline here: small tweaks lead to massive peaks. Here is my references if you'd like to do any further readings. Most of these are kind of systematic reviews or narrative reviews and stuff like that. Good overviews though, but give you a perspective if you happen to want to dive into that or feeling real adventurous. And we'll take questions. Just a quick plug though for my one in the new year. I'm very excited for this one. So I did something that was very much a similar title and all that kind of stuff in last January or so. And I'm pumped for this one because I have a whole another 12 months of learning and stuff like that I can ultimately share with everybody. So I'm excited to kind of put that forward and to, bring it on. It is another free webinar, so you guys are welcome to join in. It's January 12th. So if you've been thinking about ideas, how you're going to maybe approach and make some changes in the new year, definitely recommend it. And you'll get a link that comes out afterwards and you can check it out. And finally, check me out on my various channels and stuff like that. Facebook, YouTube, at the official Dr. Dan, or if you want to book in for a free consult with myself or to sign up for our newsletter, healthcareevolved.ca is another definite option there. Always, of course, letting me know if you have any questions following this, or if you have any feedback. Was this crappy? Was it fantastic? Love to hear it all. So yeah. So we'll wrap that up there and I'll stop sharing here and we'll do kind of a Q&A, if you will. It is sad that therapy is a luxury. Just a side comment. Yeah, I 100% agree. It is very, very challenging in that respect of things that, therapy isn't more accessible or available to people. It it's one of the best things that a lot of people really need, and we can't get the access to it, unfortunately. So it's very disappointing in that regard. I 100% agree. And I really think that everybody should go to therapy, because we need that third party. We need someone that's not close to us to look in and say, yeah, maybe you're in the wrong there. Maybe you kind of maybe want to rethink that or what have you, and just provides a different perspective. Absolutely. Awesome. Awesome as a possum. I do like the small groups. Um, any other questions at all? Maybe, maybe not. Nope. Awesome. Well, thank you everybody that came out for this one. Yeah, appreciate all the support and everything like that. If there's any follow-up questions that come afterwards, please do not hesitate to reach out. But yeah, glad you could all join me tonight, and I will talk to you wonderful people come the new year. So be sure to check out the next webinar. As I said, I did give another one previously in January, but the one that's going to come out, I mean, again, I have so many more insights and things that I want to share with everybody. So very excited about the January session. So for sure, be sure to tune in, check out Eventbrite as well. You can check out all my other social media channels, because I will have plenty of things coming up on that. So excellent. Thank you. Learned a lot. I appreciate the feedback. All right, everybody. My pleasure. My pleasure. My pleasure. Okay, we will end her off there. I hope everybody has a fantastic evening, and well, Merry Christmas to everybody as well. Have a good one, people.